North Korea is joining the war in Ukraine on the Russian side, and it's likely that they've already shipped troops over to Russia and will start taking part in combat fairly soon. This is likely to make up for manpower shortages in the Russian army, with Russian unwillingness to call for a general mobilization. Most of this information has come from South Korea, their spy agency monitoring north of the border and seeing North Korean troops being deployed into bases across the border with Russia. Both of these things have been denied by both Pyongyang and Moscow, saying that there is no such thing taking place, but given recent evidence, which I'll show in this video, it seems practically irrefutable that this is in fact the case. Anywhere from around 3,000 North Korean troops to a promised 11,000 may be sent in the coming weeks to Ukraine to take part in the fighting, and it does appear that they would be on the front lines, actively taking part in the fighting rather than playing secondary roles behind the lines in engineering battalions and other such suggested roles that had been mentioned in the past. Now, these troops are part of the SOF, or the Special Operations Forces, which I'm definitely just going to refer to as the SOF for the remainder of this video. Now, while they are called Special Forces, note though that with North Korea, this doesn't actually mean too much. Also, because of the nature of the North Korean military and all its secrecy, we don't know an awful lot about this organization at all. It's estimated there are around 200,000 members of this force, which should already say something about the quality of this force. Many special forces in other militaries, more modern militaries in the West, for example, may have several hundred members or in the low thousands, not hundreds of thousands. So it's likely that this special force label refers to their loyalty to the regime rather than to their actual capabilities and prowess and training. We know that it already existed by 1968 when it began its first military operations following the end of the Korean War in 1953. This was largely infiltrating South Korea across a rapidly closing demilitarized zone with the goal of setting up guerrilla training camps in the mountains on the other side of the border for South Korean dissidents to fight against the South Korean government at the same time that the United States had its hands tied in the final stages of its involvement in the Vietnam War. Ultimately, however, they proved very unsuccessful, with out of 120 of these special forces crossing the border, 110 were killed and 7 were captured, the final 3 remaining unaccounted for, so either they died or they managed to escape back into North Korea. The most famous of these actions across on the other side of the South Korean border was the Blue House Raid, involving Unit 124 of the SOF, which tried to assassinate the South Korean president in the Blue House. This failed rather dismally, and out of 31 operatives sent by the SOF, 29 were killed or killed themselves, 1 was captured, and only 1 managed to escape back to North Korea. By the way, they didn't succeed in assassinating the South Korean president, though that much should really be obvious. However, in 2017, a rare glimpse at the Day of the Sun parade in Pyongyang, basically the birthday of one of the Kims, we may have seen a sneak peek of what a new arm of the SOF may look like today.
경야는 최고 사령관 동지께서 일단 명령만 내리시면 백두산 번개와도 같이 적들의 심장쥐 멸종에 비슷.
So while they may be the best armed and equipped units in the North Korean army, that doesn't really say all that much. Ukraine has already been preparing for their arrival on the Ukrainian battlefield. Their organization, a hotline called I Want to Live, which basically broadcasts instructions for how Russian soldiers can surrender to Ukrainian forces, as well as the advantages of doing so, including actually using the Geneva Convention, has already been translated into Korean with several special messages for the new arrivals coming from the Korean peninsula. They added, "You must not die senselessly in a foreign land. You must not repeat the fate of hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers who will never return home. no matter how many soldiers Pyongyang sends to help Russia, no matter the destination, Ukrainian POW camps are ready to receive soldiers of any nationality, religion, and ideological views. There's been a lot of talk on social media that basically these North Korean soldiers will defect or surrender immediately upon entering the battlefield, even some joking about that they will do so for a single hot meal. However, it seems likely that the SOF specifically are being sent because of their loyalty to the Kim family and the state, and it's almost certain that their families back in North Korea will bear the lethal consequences if any of these soldiers are found to have deserted or not to have performed up to standards that are expected of them by their betters. And so it seems unlikely, in my view at least, that we'll see mass desertions from the North Korean soldiers in this very difficult position. This also seems to be confirmed by South Korea's spy agency that noted there are also signs of North Korean authorities relocating and isolating those families in a certain place in order to effectively control them and thoroughly crack down on the rumors. The sending of North Korean soldiers to Ukraine to fight with the Russians is part of a longer trajectory in the last year of further cooperation between Russia and North Korea as both become more politically isolated in the world. Back in June, they'd signed a major arms treaty talking about sending North Korean weapons to Russia to be used in Ukraine, and perhaps it's part of those agreements that now North Korean troops are also being sent over to fight. Back then, it was also announced that at least a North Korean engineering brigade would be sent over to supply and help the Russian forces, but behind the lines, so in the Donbass and not actually fighting actively. But it seems certain that these SOF forces that are now being prepared to be shipped over to Ukraine will be involved in active fighting themselves. One big question, however, is whether any of these troops can actually speak Russian, and so how effective they will actually be as soldiers as part of wider operations with Russian forces. In fact, several videos that were circulating on social media apparently showing North Korean soldiers were sometimes criticized because, of course, Russia spreads right the way into Asia, and many of the areas where Russia is heavily recruiting for its war in Ukraine are those eastern areas where people have far more Asian characteristics than necessarily European characteristics. And so it was suggested that many of these soldiers may simply be from Russia's far eastern regions as opposed to its European regions. However, this seems not to be the case, because if you listen to the language being spoken in the video, it's clearly Korean. And according to Korean-speaking social media users, they were simply commands being ordered around. But note the uniforms they were wearing, they do appear to be Russian. So this seems to be quite good confirmation that this is in fact what is going on. So then the question is, if these troops are unable to speak Russian, then what role exactly will they be fulfilling on the front line? And many have suggested that they would basically just be some kind of cannon fodder to be sent in for human wave assaults, rather than being part of any more sophisticated warfare, because they are not able to communicate with the vast bulk of Russian forces on the front. On the 21st of October as well, this image was seen from the front lines, both a Russian flag and a North Korean flag planted on a summit that had recently been captured. Although what significance we should take from this, I don't believe there are any reports of North Korean soldiers having been seen on this part of the front, or whether this is just to hype up the media or something else is unclear. So we don't really know is the answer about what's going here. But what we do know is North Korea is becoming increasingly involved in Ukraine, and this would be the first time that we see foreign soldiers from the army of another country joining in the fighting in Ukraine. For a long time it looked like that might have been Belarus joining in to fight with the Russians. Of course, lots of people have gone as individuals, some of whom left or defected from armed forces, both from various Western powers, including from South Korea, who went to fight with the Ukrainians in the Foreign Legion in the beginning days. There are also many others fighting what seem to be proxy wars, some on the Russian side, like many Chechens, although that, of course, Chechnya is part of Russia, fighting on that side. Some Serbs have been fighting for the Russians. But this would be a breaking point or a turning point rather, because this would be the first time that active military personnel from another country's armed forces are actively taking part in fighting within Ukraine. So this would be a significant escalation, and we'll see where it leads in the future. But that is all for now. Thank you all very much for watching this video about the updates of the war in Ukraine and of new North Korean involvement there. I've been following along with it myself, so I thought perhaps it's something that people would be interested in seeing, as this does seem to have some weird echoes of history gone by, with working together between North Korea and the Soviet Union. Of course, interesting today, an important distinction and difference is perhaps China's role, which has been lukewarm to critical about the war in Ukraine and Russia's involvement there. And we'll only have to wait and see for the future to see how people respond. If people are interested, I can also make a video on what South Korea is doing, because they have actually also vaguely promised to send troops to Ukraine. So then we'd almost have a Korean proxy war in Ukraine going on. So if you're interested in their responses, then let me know in the comments below and I can look into making that video as well. Alright everyone, thank you for watching. I've been Hilbert and this has been The History.